Kieran did not like being summoned to the high hall of House Alvran. The place was too quiet, too polished, and the tall alien guards stared at him like he was a strange animal. His boots made soft echoes on the smooth marble floor as he walked toward the grand throne. He was a mechanic, an engineer, a man used to ship decks and grease stains, not this world of shining jewels and silken robes. Lady Shivara, the head of House Alvran, sat high on a carved silver seat. Her skin was pale like moonlight, her eyes a deep gold. She had the kind of voice that could sound kind and threatening at the same time. She studied Kieran as if weighing every word he might say before he spoke it. "Human," she began, her tone heavy. "My house faces dangerous times. There are whispers in the council that my daughter Lyrana will be removed from the line of succession because of her condition. Her enemies say she is weak, unfit to rule. But if she is married to a human, especially one with a reputation for skill and bravery, those whispers will be silenced." Kieran frowned. "So you want me to marry her?" "Yes." By the end of this week, it was not a question. It was an order dressed up as an offer. Kieran shifted uneasily. He had heard of Lyrana. Everyone had. She was known as the Jewel of House Alvran, a young woman born with damaged legs that never fully healed. She moved about in a floating cradle, powered by old tech, her gowns always covering the metal supports. People pitied her. Others mocked her behind her back. "Why me?" he asked, though he already guessed the answer. Lady Shivara's eyes narrowed. "You are a respected human. You have repaired ships others called beyond saving. You are resourceful. And humans," she paused, "have a reputation for surviving anything. I want that reputation tied to my daughter's name." Kieran wanted to say no. He wanted to walk out, return to his workshop, and forget this conversation. But refusing. "A high noble on Veralos could mean exile, or worse. If I agree," he said slowly. "What happens next?" "A ceremony. You will be husband and wife in the eyes of the council. You will live here, in my house. You will protect her, and you will keep her from being seen as weak." It felt like a cage, even if the bars were made of gold. Still, he nodded. "Fine. I'll do it." The first time Kieran met Lyrana in person, she was in the garden. The air smelled of silver flowers, and the warm sun lit her hair in soft waves of pale blue. Her floating cradle hummed quietly as she read from a small data pad. She looked up when he approached, her eyes sharp and assessing. "So, you're the human my mother forced into this." He stopped a few steps away. "And you're the woman I'm supposed to marry. Don't pretend you wanted this." Her voice was calm, almost bored. But he caught a flicker of something, hurt, maybe, behind her words. "I didn't," he admitted. "But I'm not here to make things worse for you." She raised an eyebrow. "Good. Then keep your distance. Human. I don't need pity. I don't need a hero." She turned her attention back to her datapad, ending the conversation. The next days were strange. The marriage ceremony was short, a formal exchange of vows before the council. Kieran wore a dark suit. She wore a flowing gown that shimmered like water. Her cradle was positioned beside him, and he noticed how she never let anyone touch it, except for her. Afterward, they were led to their shared quarters, a large suite with separate rooms. Kieran quickly learned that Lyrana preferred silence. She spent hours reading or working on her own private projects. He stayed busy in the workshop the house had given him, repairing guard drones and tuning the engines of the house's small fleet. Still, he found himself noticing things about her. How she listened more than she spoke. How she could end an argument in the council chamber with a single sentence. How she kept her head high even when others looked at her with pity. One evening. Kieran was working late, trying to fix a stubborn power relay when he heard singing. It was faint coming from the garden below. Curious, he followed the sound. There she was, under the glow of lanterns, singing in a language he didn't know. Her voice was rich and steady, each note carrying a quiet strength. For a moment, she seemed free. No cradle, no politics, no weight of expectations. He didn't say anything. He just listened. When she noticed him, she stopped mid-song. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough," he said. "You have a good voice." She studied him for a moment, as if deciding whether to thank him or tell him to leave. Finally, she said, "Singing is useless in politics." "Maybe," he replied, "but it's not useless to the person who needs it." Her gaze lingered on him a little longer before she turned back to the flowers, ending the conversation. That night, Kieran returned to his workshop and looked at the spare parts scattered on the bench. A thought had been forming in his mind since the day he saw her cradle. The tech was outdated, inefficient, and maybe, just maybe, there was a way to do better. He didn't know if she would accept his help, but he couldn't ignore the thought that she deserved the chance to stand, to move freely, to prove every whisper in the council wrong. So he began sketching. The days passed quietly after the wedding. Kieran kept himself busy in the workshop, while Lyrana stayed in her chambers or attended council meetings with her mother. They spoke little, usually short exchanges at breakfast or in the hallway. The silence between them was not cold, but it was distant, like two people living on separate worlds under the same roof. But Kieran's mind kept going back to that night in the garden, to her voice under the lantern light, and to the thought that her cradle could be better. Every time he saw her glide down the hall in that old, hovering frame, he noticed its small flaws: the slight tilt when turning, the faint hum of an overworked power coil, the uneven lift on one side. It was good technology, but outdated. One evening, after the house servants had gone, he sat at his workbench and began drawing plans. The idea was risky. It wasn't just a matter of upgrading the cradle. No. What he imagined was something smaller, more personal. A wearable support system, light enough for her to move naturally, but strong enough to carry her weight and correct the weakness in her legs. He kept his sketches hidden, working only at night or when he was sure no one could walk in. One afternoon, while adjusting the joints on a guard drone, Kieran heard footsteps, or rather the low hum of a familiar cradle, approaching the workshop. Lyrana floated inside, her hands resting lightly on the cradle's control rail. "You spend more time here than anywhere else," she said, looking around at the walls stacked with tools and half-finished machines. "This is where I'm useful," he replied, without looking up. "Useful," she repeated softly, as if testing the word. "And what do you do when you're not being useful?" "Sleep," he said, her lips curved in the faintest smile. "You're not very talkative, are you?" "Depends on who I'm talking to." She didn't press the subject. Instead, her gaze moved to the corner of the table where he had forgotten to cover one of his sketches. "What's that?" she asked. Kieran's hand shot out, pulling a sheet of scrap metal over it. "Nothing. Just an idea I'm playing with." Her eyes narrowed. "An idea for me?" "Maybe," he admitted. "But I'm not ready to show you yet." She studied him for a moment before nodding. "You're a strange man, Kieran." Then she turned her cradle and left, the hum fading down the hall. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd looked at him, curious, almost interested. Maybe, he thought, she wasn't as against this marriage as she pretended. Over. The next week, Kieran gathered parts quietly from the house storerooms and old ships in the repair yard. He told anyone who asked that he was building a stabilizer for one of the smaller patrol craft. No one questioned him further. One rainy afternoon, while he was fitting a micro-power cell into the device, he heard the garden door open. Lyrana came in, not in her cradle this time, but seated in a low chair someone had pushed for her. "You've been avoiding the council dinners," she said. "I'm not good with fancy meals," he replied. "Too many rules about which fork to use." "They think you're being rude," I probably am, he said with a shrug. She tilted her head, watching him solder a joint. So what are you really building? He hesitated, then decided to be honest. It's something for you. Something that might let you walk. Her eyes widened, and for the first time since he met her, she looked unsure. People have tried before. It doesn't work. My condition isn't just weak muscles. The bones... I know, he said gently. This isn't about making you run marathons. It's about giving you the choice to stand if you want to move without that cradle, even for a short time. She looked down at her hands. Why would you do this for me? Because you're my wife now, and because I think you deserve better than the limits other people decide for you. Her gaze met his, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Finally, she said, "Show me what you built so far." He brought the frame out from under the work table. It was slim, shaped to fit around the legs and lower torso, with adjustable plates for comfort. Tiny servos and stabilizers lined the inside, controlled by a central core no bigger than a fist. Lyrana touched the smooth metal. It's light. Light means less strain, he said. It runs on a high-density power cell. No cables. No recharge for weeks. She traced a finger along the joint. And you did this without telling anyone? If the council found out, they'd accuse me of meddling in royal affairs, he replied. But if we succeed, they can't say a thing. She smiled faintly, almost like the beginning of trust. Then we succeed. From that day, she began visiting the workshop more often. Sometimes she asked questions, other times she just watched. Kieran showed her how to fine-tune the servos, and she surprised him by understanding the concepts quickly. She even suggested a few improvements to the balance sensors. As they worked, the air between them slowly changed. It wasn't just two strangers bound by duty anymore. There were small moments, her laughing when a tool slipped from his hand, him bringing her tea when she forgot to eat, the quiet pride in her eyes when a test module worked perfectly. One evening, as they adjusted the fitting on the frame, Kieran glanced at her. "When this is ready, do you want to show the council?" "No," she said firmly. "I want to show my enemies." He grinned. "Now that's the kind of thinking I like." Neither of them noticed that outside the workshop, in the shadow of the hallway, a pair of golden eyes was watching. One of the house servants had overheard everything, and he wasn't loyal to Lyrana. The workshop became their quiet world. Day after day, Kieran and Lyrana worked on the exoskeletal frame, testing each joint, adjusting each sensor. The hum of tools, the soft click of metal, and their quiet voices filled the air. Lyrana had changed. She no longer came to the workshop out of curiosity alone. She came with purpose. She learned to handle tools, read diagrams, and even spotted problems before Kieran did. Sometimes she caught herself smiling without thinking, her mind too busy to remember the bitterness she had once carried. But the outside world was not quiet. One morning, Kieran noticed the servant with golden eyes, Taryn, lingering near the workshop door. Taryn bowed politely, but there was something about the way his gaze slid to the workbench that made Kieran uneasy. Later that day, Lyrana came to him with a whisper. "Taryn serves in my mother's private wing, but I've never trusted him. He has ties to House Talvin." House Talvin, their oldest rival. They had been trying for years to push Lyrana out of the line of succession, claiming her condition made her unfit to lead. Kieran's jaw tightened. "If he tells them what we're doing, then they'll try to destroy it before it's finished," Lyrana finished for him. From that moment, they worked even more carefully. They kept the frame hidden under a false floor panel when they weren't testing it. Kieran even installed a small security lock on the workshop door, one that only he and Lyrana could open. Still, he knew it was only a matter of time before word got out. One rainy evening, while testing the balance system, Lyrana lost her footing and almost fell. Kieran caught her before she could hit the ground, steadying her with both hands. "You're pushing too fast," he said gently. "We'll get there, but we have to take it step by step." She looked up at him, her breathing quick. "I'm tired of steps, Kieran. I've lived my whole life waiting for the right time to do something. I want this now." He met her gaze. "Then we'll get it done. Together." She smiled, a real smile, full of determination. By the end of that week, the frame was almost ready for a full test. The metal was shaped to her body. The joints moved like they were part of her, and the stabilizers adjusted to her weight. She could take a few steps with his help. Every time she stood without the cradle, her eyes lit up with something fierce. But danger was already moving toward them. 2 nights later, Kieran found the workshop door unlocked. He always double-checked it, so this was wrong. Stepping inside, he noticed nothing was missing, except the data pad that held their design plans. He cursed under his breath and went straight to Lyrana's chambers. She was awake, reading under a dim light. When she saw his face, she set the pad aside. "What happened?" "The plans are gone." Her expression hardened. "Terran." They both knew it without speaking more. If House Talvin had the designs, they could present them to the council first and claim Lyrana was stealing technology to gain favor. "We have to finish this now," Kieran said, "before they twist it against you." For the next 2 days, they worked without rest. Meals were brought to the workshop. They barely noticed the passage of time. Lyrana pushed herself harder than ever, standing for longer periods, practicing small steps, forcing her body to adapt. Her legs trembled, but her spirit didn't. On the 3rd night, they heard shouting from the courtyard. A messenger from House Talvin had arrived, demanding audience with Lady Shavara. Kieran and Lyrana went to the council hall together, the unfinished frame hidden under her gown. House Talvin's representative, Lord Dravik, stood tall and smug, holding a datapad. "Lady Shavara," he said smoothly, "it has come to our attention that your daughter is in possession of stolen technology, taken from our research archives." Whispers filled the hall. Kieran stepped forward. "Those designs are ours. I built them from scratch," Dravik sneered. "A human mechanic claiming to invent advanced biomechanical supports? How amusing." Lyrana's voice cut through the noise, sharp and clear. "You can doubt him all you like, Dravik, but you cannot doubt what you see." Before anyone could stop her, she stepped out from her cradle and activated the frame. Gasps filled the chamber as she took a step forward. Then another. "You said I was unfit to rule," she said, her voice steady. "You said I would never stand beside my people. Look at me now." The council members stared in stunned silence. Even Lady Shavara's usual composed face showed a flicker of pride. Dravik's smirk vanished. "This changes nothing," he said, quickly, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "It changes everything," Lyrana replied. After the meeting, Kieran helped her back to their quarters. She was exhausted but smiling. "They'll come after us harder now," she said. "Let them," Kieran replied. "They just saw what you can do." But as he closed the door behind them, he couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was only beginning, and their enemies were not done yet. The council chamber incident spread through the capital like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone in the city had heard the story of Lyrana Alvran walking in front of the council. Some called it a miracle. Others called it a trick. And some, especially in House Talvin, called it a dangerous shift in power. Lyrana stayed in her quarters for 2 days, resting her legs and avoiding the flood of visitors wanting to see the walking princess for themselves. Kieran spent the time reinforcing the exoskeleton, making it lighter and more responsive. He knew that if their enemies couldn't discredit the device, they might try to destroy it. On the 3rd day, a formal challenge arrived. A messenger from House Talvin stood at the gates, holding a sealed letter. Lady Shivara broke the seal and read it aloud. To Lyrana Alvran. If you claim you can stand and lead, prove it before the people. Face our champion in the trials of honor. Kieran frowned. Trials of honor, Lyrana explained. An old tradition. Not a fight to the death, but a test. Of skill, agility, and willpower. If I refuse, it will be seen as admitting weakness. If I accept and fail, they will use it to push me out of the succession. And if you win, Kieran asked, then they will have to acknowledge my right to lead. She gave a small smile. And it will humiliate House Talvin in front of the whole city. Kieran's mind was already working. Then we'll prepare. But you're not going into this unready. For the next week, they trained in the palace courtyard. At first, Lyrana struggled to move quickly with the frame. It supported her, but years of relying on the cradle had left her balance uncertain. Kieran set up obstacles. Small steps, narrow beams, weighted targets to hit. He was patient, correcting her stance, encouraging her when frustration started to show. By the 4th day, she was moving faster. By the 6th, she could sprint short, distances without the servos overloading. By the 7th, she could twist, dodge, and strike with surprising precision. The morning of the trials came with bright skies and a restless crowd. The city's great arena was filled with citizens, nobles, and off-world visitors curious to see the human engineer's invention in action. Banners of House Alvran and House Talvin hung on opposite sides of the stands. Kieran adjusted the frame one last time. Remember, pace yourself. The frame will handle the strain, but your body still needs to keep up. Lyrana nodded. And if I fall? You get back up, he said firmly. Every time. The announcer's voice boomed over the arena. First, trial, obstacle run. The course was a maze of raised platforms, swinging ropes, and narrow bridges. House Talvin's champion, a tall warrior named Vreth, moved with speed and grace. Lyrana followed close behind, the crowd gasping as she leapt small gaps and ducked under swinging bars. A few times she stumbled, but each time she caught herself and kept going. When they crossed the finish line, Vreth was ahead by only a few seconds. The second trial was precision, hitting a series of moving targets with a light spear. Lyrana's aim was steady, each strike hitting near the center. Vreth's strikes were faster, but 2 missed entirely. The score evened. The final trial was the hardest, endurance. Contestants had to climb a tower, retrieve a flag, and descend without falling. The tower's walls were uneven, the holds small. Vreth started strong, but halfway up, his foot slipped, slowing him down. Lyrana kept a steady pace, the exoskeleton's servos supporting her weight while she focused on her grip. The crowd roared as she reached the top first, yanking the flag free. On the way down, Vreth tried to block her path. She sidestepped, using the frame's boosted balance to move around him, and landed on the ground with the flag raised high. The arena erupted into cheers. The announcer declared, "Victory! Lyrana Alvran of House Alvran!" Kieran felt a rush of pride as he watched her lift the flag toward the cheering crowd. In that moment, she was no longer the noblewoman in a cradle. She was a leader, standing tall on her own. But as the cheers faded, Kieran noticed a figure slipping away from the stands, a man in Talvin colors carrying a small black case. Something about the way he moved made Kieran's stomach tighten. Later, back in their quarters, Lyrana was still smiling from the victory when Kieran's voice broke the moment. "We need to be careful. I saw someone leaving with a case. Looked like it could hold sabotage equipment. You think they'll try again?" she asked. "I'm sure of it," he said. "Winning today hurt their pride. They won't stop here." That night, while the palace slept, Kieran set silent alarms around their quarters and the workshop. He knew their enemies had seen the exoskeleton's power, and that meant it had just become the most valuable and most dangerous piece of technology in the city. As he finished securing the last sensor, he glanced at the closed door to Lyrana's room. They had won the trial, but the real fight was still ahead. The palace slept under a quiet night sky. The halls were dim, lit only by the soft glow of wall lamps. Outside, a cool wind moved through the garden, rustling the silver leaves. Everything seemed calm, but Kieran's alarms told a different story. He was in the workshop when a faint pulse from one of the sensors reached his wrist communicator. Someone had breached the west hall, close to Lyrana's chambers. He didn't think. He grabbed his sidearm, the one he rarely carried inside the palace, and ran. His boots were silent on the carpeted floors, but his heart pounded. As he reached her door, he heard it. Soft, metallic clicks, like someone adjusting a tool. Kieran slammed the door open. Two masked figures stood over Lyrana's cradle. One held a blade-like tool, aimed at the frame they had built together. The other turned toward him, reaching for a weapon. "Move away from her!" Kieran growled. The first intruder lunged, but Kieran fired a stun shot, dropping him instantly. The second tried to run, but Lyrana activated the exoskeleton and stepped in his path. "You picked the wrong room," she said coldly. She swung her arm, the servo-assisted movement faster than the attacker expected, knocking him backward. Kieran moved in, pinning the man until palace guards arrived. Within minutes, both intruders were dragged away. The captain of the guard confirmed what they already suspected. The men were linked to House Talvin. Lady Shivara arrived soon after, her face pale with anger. "They will not stop until you are broken, Lyrana. You cannot stay here." Lyrana looked at Kieran. "Where would we go?" "Somewhere they won't follow," he said. "But we have to leave now." They packed only what they needed. Kieran took tools, spare power cells for the exoskeleton, and a few weapons. Lyrana took a small bag of personal items and a data pad. Under the cover of darkness, they left through a service tunnel beneath the palace, emerging in the quieter parts of the city. Kieran had a contact there, a shipyard worker who owed him a favor. They secured a small transport and flew into the mountains, far from the capital's reach. Their new refuge was a simple cabin built into the side of a cliff overlooking a wide river valley. It was old, but safe. The first days were strange. There were no guards, no servants, no council politics, just the two of them cooking their own meals and keeping watch for any sign of pursuit. At first, Lyrana was restless. "I'm not used to this kind of quiet," she admitted one night, sitting by the fire. "Quiet's not so bad," Kieran said. "Gives you room to think. It also gives you too much time to remember the things you can't change." She replied softly. He looked at her for a moment. "Then maybe you change the things you can." Over the next week, he helped her train in the open valley. Without the pressure of an audience, she moved more freely, pushing herself further each day. She practiced climbing, running on uneven ground, and even basic self-defense moves. Sometimes she stumbled, but she always got back up, and Kieran noticed that she no longer spoke of herself as someone broken. One evening, after a long day of training, they sat on the cabin's porch watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine. "You've changed," Kieran said quietly. "So have you," she replied. "When we first met, you didn't look at me unless you had to. And you barely spoke to me," he reminded her with a small smile. "I thought you were here to pity me," she said. "But you never did. You just saw me." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched the fading light. "I saw someone who wasn't given a choice, and I know what that feels like." She turned to him, curious. "What choice was taken? From you?" "My freedom," he said simply. "When your mother called me to the High Hall, I knew there was no way to refuse without losing everything I'd worked for. I thought I'd end up resenting you." "But you don't," she said, softly. "No," he admitted. "I don't." Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither looked away. There was no palace, no council, no enemies, just the two of them on a quiet mountainside. The peace didn't last. 2 nights later, while Kieran was repairing a broken panel on the cabin's exterior, he saw a faint light moving in the distance. Through his scope, he spotted a small group making their way up the mountain path. He went inside quickly. "We've got company. 3, maybe 4, armed." Lyrana didn't panic. She tightened the straps of the exoskeleton and grabbed a stun staff from the wall. "Then we make sure they don't take us alive." They set up defensive traps, simple wire alarms, loose rocks on the path, and narrow choke points near the cabin entrance. When the attackers reached the top, the first fell into a concealed net, while the second tripped over a wire and went sprawling. The third managed to reach the porch, only to find Lyrana blocking his way. She moved with precision, dodging his strike and landing a blow to his chest that sent him crashing into the railing. Kieran handled the last attacker himself, using a stun blast to drop him. When the fight was over, the 4 men were bound and unconscious. Kieran searched them, finding more proof they were from House Talvin. Lyrana stood beside him, breathing hard but steady. "They really won't stop, will they?" "Not until we make them," Kieran said. She glanced at him, her eyes fierce. "Then let's make them." And in that moment it was clear. They weren't just running anymore. They were planning to take the fight back to the capital. The morning sun over the mountains was clear and cold when Kieran and Lyrana began their return to the capital. The quiet days in the cabin were over. Now every step was toward confrontation. Lyrana wore the exoskeleton under her cloak, its polished frame reinforced and tuned for speed. Kieran carried a pack of tools, evidence they had gathered, and a weapon at his side. Their small transport slid through the clouds and into the bustling air lanes of the city. News of their escape from the assassination attempt had already spread. "People," whispered as they passed, some in awe, some in fear. "Are you ready for this?" Kieran asked as they neared the palace gates. Lyrana's eyes were steady. "I've been ready since the first time they called me weak. Inside the palace, Lady..." Shivara awaited them in the high hall. Relief flickered across her face when she saw them both alive. "You shouldn't have returned so soon," she said, though her voice carried pride. "If we waited," Lyrana replied, "our enemies would have written the ending to our story. I'm here to write it myself. The council was called into emergency session." Nobles filled the chamber, the banners of their houses swaying in the slight draft. At the far end, representatives of House Talvin sat with false calm, their leader Lord Dravik leaning back in his chair as if this were already won. Lyrana and Kieran stepped forward. "You have accused me of being unfit," Lyrana began, her voice carrying through the hall. "You have sent spies, saboteurs, and assassins to destroy me. You thought that because I could not walk unaided, I could not lead. Today, that ends." She unfastened her cloak, revealing the exoskeleton in full. The murmurs in the chamber rose. Kieran stepped to her side, holding up a small projection device. With a flick of his thumb, images filled the air, security recordings from the cabin, the failed assassination, the attacker's confessions. The proof was undeniable. House Talvin had ordered her death. Dravik stood quickly. "This is a fabrication." "Enough." Lady Shivara's voice rang out like steel. "You've been caught. Your dishonor will be recorded, and your seat in the council stripped." Gasps filled the hall. Dravik's allies shifted uneasily, knowing the tide had turned. But Lyrana wasn't finished. "You wanted to show the galaxy a weak heir. Instead, you will show them this." She stepped forward, activating the exoskeleton fully. Servos whirred softly as she walked to the center of the chamber, no longer with hesitation, but with the stride of someone who belonged there. She turned to the gathered nobles. "Strength is not the absence of hardship. Strength is the refusal to be broken by it. Remember that before you judge the next leader who is not like you." The chamber erupted in applause from her allies, and even some of her former doubters stood in respect. Outside the hall, the people were waiting. Word of the council session had spread, and a crowd filled the courtyard. When Lyrana appeared on the palace steps, walking unaided, the roar of voices shook the air. Kieran stood just behind her, watching the pride in her posture, the fire in her eyes. Later, in the quiet of their quarters, the adrenaline faded. Lyrana set the exoskeleton to rest mode and sat down, looking at him with a softer expression. "We did it," she said. "No," he replied with a small smile. "You did it." She was silent for a moment, then her lips curved slightly. "There's something else I need to tell you." Kieran frowned. "What is it?" She took a breath. "While we were in the mountains, I realized something. I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Kieran blinked, his mind running through the months, the changes, the quiet moments they had shared without even realizing how deep their bond had grown. "You're sure?" he asked. She nodded, her hand resting lightly on her stomach. "I had the med scan done before we left the cabin. I didn't tell you because I wanted to be certain." He let out a long breath, a strange mix of surprise and warmth filling him. "Guess that means we're not just fighting for us anymore." "No," she said softly, her voice steady. "We're fighting for the future we're going to give, our child." Kieran sat beside her, the weight of everything they had faced settling into something else. Hope. "Then whatever comes next, we face it together. No one's going to take this from us." Outside, the city celebrated the downfall of House Talvin and the rise of a leader they had once dismissed. Inside, in the quiet of their private rooms, a human and an alien noblewoman, once strangers bound by a forced marriage, sat side by side, planning not just for survival, but for the life they would build. Lyrana smiled faintly, leaning her head against his shoulder. "When my mother forced this marriage, I thought it was the end of my choices, but she gave me you, and somehow, that's the best choice I never made." Kieran didn't reply right away. He just reached for her hand, holding it firmly. The war was over, for now. But their story was only beginning, and in the palace high above the city, two unlikely partners, now husband and wife, allies and equals, looked toward a future neither had imagined, but both were ready to fight for.